Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, we'll look into what is Flexbox and how it works. And then we'll look into how we can use different Flexbox properties to position elements in HTML. The main idea behind Flexbox is that it gives parent container the ability to align its children regardless of their height and width. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Now, as you can see in my HTML, I have a container with a class of flex container, and then that container consists of three child elements. Now, in terms of Flexbox, this container will be called as flex container, and these three children divs will be called as flex items. Now, Flexbox has a lot of CSS properties. Some of those properties will go on the parent element known as flex container, and some of the properties will go on the child elements known as flex items. We will look into what are some of the main Flexbox properties that will be applied to the parent container. Now, let's go ahead and start adding some Flexbox properties to our flex container. So, I'll begin by adding a display of flex to the flex container. Now, as soon as I hit save, by default, Flexbox will position all the flex items in a row. Now, this is how you initialize Flexbox using display flex property. The next property we'll look into, it's called flex direction. In order to understand this property, first let's look into how the Flexbox positions the flex items. Flexbox has two main axes along which it will position flex items. Now, in order to visualize how the axes are laid out on Flexbox, I have added few helpful classes. First one is called show axis. Now, as you can see, Flexbox has two main axes. The first one is the one in orange, it's called main axis that goes horizontally, and the second one in green is called cross axis that is laid out vertically. Now, flex direction property gives you the ability to change how those axes are laid out. By default, the main axis is laid out horizontally, but if I set the flex direction to column, flex direction column, it will switch how the axes are laid out. Now, let me add another helpful class called switch axis. Now, this is what the flex direction property does. Now, if you set flex direction to column, it will switch how the axes are laid out. Now, as you can see, our main axis is laid out vertically and the cross axis is laid out horizontally. And the flex box will always position the flex items on main axis. That's why our flex items are now laid out vertically. Now that you guys have an idea of how we can use flex direction property to change how the axes are laid out, let me get rid of the helpful classes first. Save. Awesome. So now flex direction has a lot more values that you can assign to it other than column. So the first one is called row. Now if I hit save, this is the default behavior of Flexbox. So even if I get rid of flex direction, Flexbox is this is how it'll lay out the flex items. Now there is another one called row reverse, which will simply reverse how the items are laid out in horizontal manner. And the last one is called column reverse. So this will basically switch the axis and the items are laid out vertically but in reverse order. Now let me just switch back to row. The next property we'll be looking at, it's called justify content. Justify content defines how the flex items will be aligned along the main axis and how the extra space will be distributed among flex items. Now let me go ahead and add justify content property to our flex container and set it equal to space between. Now as soon as I hit save, as you can see, the space between value will spread the flex item across the flex container and the it will also add equal amount of space between the items. Now, the next value we'll be looking at is called space around. Now, what space around does is it will take all the extra space in Flexbox and add equal amount of space around all the flex items. Now, let's say you don't want any space around flex items. You simply want all your flex items to be centered in the flex container. So in order to achieve that, you can just simply set justify content to center, and that will center all your flex items in your flex container. Next, we'll look into align items property. Align items property defines how the flex items will be aligned along the cross axis and how the extra space will be distributed among the flex items. Align items is pretty much very similar to justify content, but it works on cross axis. Now let's go ahead and play around with align item properties. So if I set align items to center, so Flexbox will basically center all the flex items along cross axis. Now let's say if I set align items to stretch, now what Flexbox will do is Flexbox will take the height of the biggest flex item and make all the other flex items height set to that height. Now, as soon as I hit save, you will see height of these two flex item will be set to the height of the third one. Now, this is the default behavior of Flexbox. I mean, if I don't set flex align items, if I get rid of this, you will still see the height of the first two flex items set to the third one. This is what Flexbox sets as default. Now, the next property we'll be looking at, it's called FlexWrap. By default, Flexbox will try to adjust all the flex items in one line, regardless of screen size. In order to push flex items to the second line, if there is less space, we will have to set flex wrap to wrap. So for example, let me set some minimum width on the flex items, set it to 150 pixels, hit save. Now let's say if I shrink the browser size, instead of breaking the flex items to next line, Flexbox has added this scroll bar. Now in order to fix that, let's set flex wrap to wrap. Using flex wrap, Flexbox will break the flex item to the next line if there is not enough space. And that's pretty much it for flex wrap. The next property that we'll be looking at, it's called AlignContent. AlignContent will determine how the flex lines will be positioned along cross axis. Now keep in mind, AlignContent only works when the flex items are distributed along multiple lines using FlexWrap property. Now I have set a height of 700 pixels on flex container in order to demonstrate how the AlignContent works. So let's go ahead and set aligned content to center. This will center all the flex lines along cross axis. If I set it to flex end, as you can see, it will position all the flex lines to the end of the flex container along cross axis. Now this is how aligned content works. Now we have pretty much covered all the properties that can be applied to flex container. In the next video, I'll be going through all the properties that can be applied to flex items. Once again, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you come back for the second video and make sure to subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.